Ethan Carter has always cherished his quiet suburban retreat, a place where nature, history, and hard work meld together to form a sanctuary of independence. A decorated military veteran and now a local city official, Ethan's home isn't just a house. It's a legacy he's built over decades with passion and perseverance. Nestled in a leafy neighborhood, his property features a lovingly maintained garden, an old picket fence, and most proudly, a private pond that has been in his family for generations. This pond is Ethan's oasis. On warm summer afternoons, its gentle ripples reflect the clear blue sky, while ducks and other wildlife make it their playground. The pond has served as a peaceful retreat from the bustle of everyday life, a place to relax, fish, or simply enjoy the calming presence of water and nature. For Ethan, the pond symbolizes his deep connection to the land and the freedom he fought so hard to preserve. However, not everyone in the community values the same independence. At the helm of the local homeowners association (HOA) is Kerren, a self-appointed enforcer of conformity with a reputation for turning minor deviations into major transgressions. Kerren's obsession with immaculate lawns, perfect aesthetics, and rigid adherence to a one-size-fits-all set of rules has long made her a figure of dread among many residents. Dressed in crisp suits with her ever-present clipboard, she patrols the neighborhood with an air of self-importance, convinced that everyone must conform to her narrow vision of perfection. One fateful morning, as Ethan strolled along the edge of his property, he was stunned to find trash piled high in his private pond. The once tranquil water was marred by discarded fast food wrappers, plastic bottles, and other refuse. A shocking transformation that struck at the heart of what his pond meant to him. When he confronted his neighbors, he soon discovered the culprit. Kerren had, in an effort to clean up or perhaps demonstrate community standards, dumped a load of trash into his pond without his permission. Furious, Ethan marched straight to Kerren, who was overseeing an HOA meeting at the community center. "Kerren, how dare you dump trash in my private pond?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of outrage and disbelief. "That pond is a part of my family's legacy. It's not your dumping ground for your misguided ideas of cleanliness and order." Kerren, with an imperious tilt of her head and a dismissive sneer, replied, "Ethan, you know the rules. If your property doesn't meet our community standards, corrective measures must be taken. I'm simply ensuring that everyone's property reflects the high standards we demand here." Her tone left no room for discussion, only the cold promise of further sanctions. Stung by her condescension and the blatant violation of his property rights, Ethan realized that this wasn't a minor dispute. It was the opening salvo in a battle between individual freedom and bureaucratic overreach. His pond, the peaceful centerpiece of his home, was now a symbol of everything he held dear, and it was under attack. As dusk fell that day, Ethan sat by the edge of the pond, the water still dark with debris, and vowed that he would not let Kerren's tyranny go unchallenged. The stage was set for a showdown that would test the very limits of community power versus personal liberty. The very next morning, as Ethan prepared to confront the new day, he found an official notice taped to his front door. The letter, embossed with the HOA's crest and signed by Kerren herself, accused him of violating community aesthetic standards by allowing his pond to become unsightly due to the trash. The notice demanded that he clean up his property immediately or face a fine of $750. Its language was cold and legalistic, a thinly veiled threat intended to force compliance. Ethan's heart pounded as he read the notice. He knew his pond was not only a natural haven, but also a cherished part of his family history. Determined not to be bullied, he gathered copies of local zoning regulations and property rights documents that clearly affirmed his legal right to manage his land as he saw fit. With a steady resolve, he drafted a formal complaint disputing the fine and questioning the legitimacy of the HOA's interference. As the morning mist lifted, a sedan pulled up to his property. Two uniformed inspectors emerged, clipboards in hand, and approached his home with an air of bureaucratic precision. "Mr. Carter," one said in a flat tone, "we're here on behalf of the HOA to verify that your property complies with community standards." Ethan met them at the door. My pond and the rest of my property have always been maintained in accordance with local laws, he replied firmly. Despite his detailed explanation and the supporting documentation, the inspectors scribbled notes and moved on, clearly under orders from Kerren to find fault. Shortly afterward, Kerren herself arrived, dressed immaculately and carrying her trademark clipboard. She surveyed Ethan's property with a haughty air. "Ethan, these rules are non-negotiable," she stated sharply. "If you don't clean up your pond immediately, you will incur further penalties. Remember, the rules apply to everyone, regardless of personal history." Her words cut deep. Ethan's mind raced with the implications of this intrusive oversight. This was not about maintaining a tidy neighborhood. It was about enforcing a homogenized standard that left no room for personal expression. That evening, as he sat on his porch listening to the soft hum of the night, Ethan vowed that he would not stand idly by while his property was exploited to further Kerren's agenda. The battle was only just beginning. In the days that followed, Kerren's tactics grew increasingly aggressive. What started with a single notice soon escalated into a barrage of fines and intimidation. Ethan began finding multiple violation notices stapled to various parts of his property, each one citing a new infraction, such as failure to maintain a pristine pond and unsanitary property conditions. The language was merciless, and it was clear that Kerren's goal was to subdue him through relentless pressure. Rumors started circulating among the neighbors. Several residents, who had long admired Ethan's dedication to his property, confided that they too had received similar notices for minor infractions that they never even knew existed. One frustrated homeowner even whispered that fines mysteriously disappeared from the HOA's accounts when certain donations were made, implying that Kerren was using the board's funds for her own personal vendettas. Determined to expose the true nature of the HOA's actions, Ethan set up hidden cameras around his pond and the surrounding landscape. Over the next several days, he captured footage of inspectors arriving unannounced, measuring the water's edge, and issuing vague warnings, as if his property were a public exhibition. One particularly damning clip showed an inspector remarking on the unsightly state of the pond while scribbling furiously in his notebook. Ethan compiled every photograph, video clip, and whispered testimony into a comprehensive dossier. His files were a damning record of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, evidence that Kerren's campaign was not about protecting community standards, but about exerting personal control. As the tension mounted, the community's outrage began to simmer, and whispers of resistance spread like wildfire. When the next HOA board meeting was announced, the atmosphere was electric. Homeowners, many of whom had experienced similar harassment, gathered in a packed meeting room with printed copies of Ethan's evidence in hand. As Ethan stepped up to the podium, he recounted the sequence of events with calm determination, laying out his dossier piece by piece. The room fell silent as every violation, every unjust fine, and every intrusive inspection was brought to light. It was no longer just about a pond. It was about the right to manage one's property free from bureaucratic tyranny. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the community was ready to challenge Kerren's overreach. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and the collective voice of the residents was growing stronger with every piece of evidence presented. One chilly morning, as Ethan made his routine rounds by the pond, he noticed a group of HOA inspectors, led by Kerren, approaching his property. Their objective was clear. They intended to inspect his pond, turning it into a showcase of supposed noncompliance. Kerren's smug demeanor and authoritarian tone left no doubt that she was determined to force him into submission. Fed up with a constant intrusion, Ethan decided it was time to fight back in a way that would not only protect his property, but also send a clear message. In his garage, he had recently upgraded his automated sprinkler system, a state-of-the-art setup designed to conserve water and maintain his garden. With a spark of defiance, Ethan formulated a plan. If Kerren and her cronies were going to invade his private pond, he would turn the very element of water into his weapon. At the precise moment when Kerren's team reached the edge of his property, Ethan activated the sprinkler system with a remote control. a torrent of water erupted from hidden nozzles, flooding the bank of the pond and drenching the oncoming inspectors. The sudden deluge transformed the scene into a chaotic spectacle. Kerren's clipboard and perfectly pressed suit were soaked, and the inspectors were forced to retreat amid a cacophony of splashing water. Laughter erupted from the onlooking neighbors who had gathered at a safe distance. Videos of the incident spread quickly on social media, and images of a disheveled, waterlogged Kerren became a viral symbol of resistance. For Ethan, the sprinkler strike was not just an act of retribution. It was a powerful declaration that his property, his legacy, and his right to live on his own terms would not be compromised by arbitrary enforcement. The image of a drenched Kerren, trying in vain to regain her composure, reverberated throughout the community. Her efforts to control his property had backfired spectacularly, galvanizing more residents to stand up against her overreach. The message was clear. If the HOA attempted to bully him, they would be met with equally ingenious resistance. Desperate to reassert her diminishing control, Kerren resorted to one final, extreme measure. That evening, incensed by the humiliation of the sprinkler incident and determined to turn public sentiment back in her favor, she picked up the phone and called the local police. In her call, she falsely claimed that Ethan's unruly management of his private pond and his unauthorized use of automated systems had escalated into a public disturbance, endangering community safety. It was a desperate attempt to leverage law enforcement to silence his defiance. Within minutes, a police patrol arrived at Ethan's property. The officers, maintaining their professional detachment, met Ethan at his front door. Calmly, he presented copies of all relevant permits, zoning documents, and even a record of previous correspondence with the HOA, demonstrating that his practices were fully legal and compliant. The officers examined the evidence and commended the efficiency of his sprinkler system, which had, in fact, saved his property from further intrusion. Unwilling to accept defeat, Kerren tried one last trick. She secretly hired a private investigator to gather evidence of supposed mismanagement on Ethan's part. That night, while the community slept, the PI attempted to sneak onto the property. However, Ethan's previously installed security cameras captured every moment. The PI was clearly seen trespassing and triggering alarms. The time-stamped footage left no doubt that Kerren had again overstepped her bounds. At the next HOA meeting, with the entire community in attendance, Ethan took to the stage. With calm, unwavering resolve, he played the incriminating footage for all to see. This, he declared, is proof that Kerren's actions have crossed the line from aggressive oversight to criminal trespass. Instead of protecting our community, she's been abusing her power. The room fell silent as gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Kerren attempted to interject with feeble excuses about maintaining order, but the evidence was overwhelming. Later that day, under mounting pressure from local authorities, Kerren was issued a trespassing citation. This final, desperate move left no doubt. Her reign of arbitrary control was coming to a dramatic end. The community's collective support for Ethan and for the rights of every homeowner had reached its tipping point. In the wake of Kerren's humiliation and her final desperate move, the community rallied with renewed vigor. An emergency town hall meeting was convened at the local community center, a stark, fluorescent-lit space that, on that day, became the arena for the residents' revolt against arbitrary power. Frustrated homeowners, many of whom had long suffered under Kerren's draconian fines and invasive inspections, gathered in large numbers, armed with copies of Ethan's comprehensive dossier. Photographs, video recordings, and written testimonies documenting every instance of her overreach. One by one, residents recounted their personal experiences of being bullied and fined for trivial deviations. The collective anger in the room was palpable, a resounding chorus that declared, "Enough is enough." After hours of impassioned debate, the community voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and remove Kerren from her position as president. The decision was swift and decisive, a clear rejection of the tyrannical control that had long stifled their neighborhood. Local media quickly picked up the story, heralding it as the fall of the HOA tyrant. while city officials launched an independent investigation into the board's financial practices. It soon emerged that funds had been misappropriated to support Kerren's personal vendettas, and numerous fines had been imposed solely to intimidate nonconformists. The legal fallout was swift. Heavy fines were levied against former board members, and some individuals faced criminal charges for fraud and mismanagement. For Ethan, the collapse of the HOA was a moment of quiet vindication. Sitting on his porch one crisp morning, he sipped his coffee as the sun rose over his reclaimed property, a property now free from the oppressive dictates of Kerren's regime. The dark shadow of bureaucratic tyranny had lifted, replaced by the vibrant spirit of a united community determined to reclaim its rights and dignity. Across the neighborhood, the old, oppressive rules were discarded. Residents began openly discussing plans for a new, democratically elected board that would govern transparently and respect individual property rights. The era of Kerren's heavy-handed control was over, and the community embraced a future built on mutual respect and accountability. Following the community's decisive vote and the dissolution of the corrupt HOA board, the legal system moved swiftly to bring accountability. City inspectors and independent auditors conducted a thorough review of the board's financial records, uncovering a labyrinth of misappropriated funds and baseless fines imposed to enforce Kerren's personal vendetta. Evidence revealed that money earmarked for community improvements had been diverted to support her ambitions, and countless fines had been levied without proper justification. Armed with this damning evidence, a coalition of aggrieved homeowners, led by Ethan, filed a class-action lawsuit against the former board. In a series of public hearings, Ethan presented his meticulously compiled dossier: video recordings of intrusive inspections, photographs of absurd violation notices, and internal communications that exposed the board's systematic abuse of power. The courtroom became a stage for the community's collective voice, with every piece of evidence reinforcing that no one is above the law. The judge's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Heavy fines were imposed on the board members, and several individuals faced criminal charges for fraud and mismanagement. Furthermore, the settlement mandated that all misappropriated funds be redirected toward community development projects, and that a new, democratically elected board be established to govern transparently. Headlines soon splashed fall of the HOA tyrants, and the case quickly became a beacon of hope for communities resisting arbitrary authority. For Ethan and his neighbors, the legal victory was more than financial restitution. It was a powerful reclaiming of their autonomy and a clear message that a united community will not tolerate abuse of power. With the legal verdict and public humiliation firmly in place, Kerren's personal world began to crumble. Once the unyielding enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, she was now exposed as a petty, overreaching bully. Forced to resign from her position as president, Kerren found herself isolated as former allies and board members distanced themselves. Her stately home, a symbol of the status she once so proudly maintained, was quickly put on the market amid swirling rumors of financial ruin. Whispers soon spread that her longtime partner had finally abandoned her, unable to endure the relentless pressure and public disgrace. Attempts to secure even a modest role in property management were met with derision. At local job fairs, potential employers exchanged skeptical glances whenever her name was mentioned, and the community's scorn was palpable. In one particularly humiliating moment at a city hall meeting, Kerren desperately tried to justify her actions as necessary for community order. Instead, her feeble explanations were met with laughter and pointed remarks from residents, cementing her status as a cautionary tale of abuse of power. For Ethan, witnessing Kerren's personal downfall was a quiet moment of poetic justice. There was no need for overt celebration. Every public misstep, every financial setback, and every whispered comment reinforced the truth. No one, not even a self-styled enforcer of rules, is above accountability. Kerren's ruin became a lasting symbol of the inevitable collapse of tyranny when faced with the united spirit of a community determined to live freely. As summer mellowed into a gentle autumn, the community of Carter Marina embraced a new era of freedom and unity. The dark days of arbitrary fines and invasive HOA mandates were now relegated to cautionary tales, an ugly chapter that had finally been closed. Ethan sat on his porch, the warm glow of the setting sun reflecting off his reclaimed property, a quiet smile on his face as he recalled the long battle. At a celebratory block party in the community park, neighbors gathered to toast their victory over bureaucratic tyranny. Laughter filled the air as residents shared humorous anecdotes about the past, especially the day when Kerren, attempting to inspect his mailbox yet again, was caught on his surveillance cameras, leading to her arrest on federal theft charges. In one particularly playful moment, a longtime friend produced a comically oversized HOA violation notice, accusing Ethan of excessive mailbox vigilance and unauthorized federal law enforcement. With a wry grin, Ethan accepted the faux citation and quipped, "I guess they really did try." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, a final, resounding mic drop on the era of oppression. As twilight deepened and the party wound down, families and friends lingered together, discussing plans for a future built on transparency, innovation, and mutual respect. The oppressive rules that had once loomed over Carter Marina were replaced by a community-led governance system that celebrated individuality and safeguarded personal rights. Sitting quietly on his porch as the last light faded, Ethan reflected on the journey. His mailbox, stolen again by an overzealous Kerren, but recovered thanks to his vigilant camera system and subsequent federal action, stood as a proud emblem of his reclaimed autonomy. The legacy of HOA Kerren's tyranny had been consigned to a cautionary tale, and the united spirit of the community shone brighter than ever. Fade to black.